Something that I've said numerous times over and over again, and I've repeated it time and time again, is I hope that no one has ever told you that when you follow Jesus, everything just gets easier. I hope no one has ever told you that, and if somebody has told you that, or maybe you felt like I've implied that, I apologize, because that is never my intention to say that. It's never my intention to lead you on to think that once you surrender your life to Jesus, that everything just gets easier. But if we're honest, sometimes that's the way the picture gets painted. Sometimes that's the way coming to faith and hearing the gospel gets painted, that if you give your life to Jesus, that all your problems will just magically vanish and go away. Now, I'll be honest with you, I wish that was the case. How many of you wish that's just the way it was? That all your problems will just vanish, all your problems, all the burdens will just magically go away. But I think many of us have figured out by now that that's never the case. That is not a reality for us. It's like whenever you're determined to fix your life, when you're determined to do the right thing, when you're determined to get your life right with Jesus, it's like these people show up, these voices show up all of a sudden to tell you why you shouldn't do that, or to tell you how that is impossible for it to be done. You'll always stay the same. You'll never change. Anybody ever heard those voices before? That's just the way that it is. That's the reality of living for Jesus. And you've also got to keep in mind this one thing as well, that along with the other voices and the people that are telling you not to do that, you've also got to come to the realization that there's also somebody else out there that doesn't like what you're doing with your life either. And I hope you understand this morning that we all have this enemy. Anybody know who that enemy is? The devil, Satan. And when you surrender your life to Jesus, what happens is you become this target of the enemy. You become this target of the devil. Why? Because the devil hates Jesus. And because the devil hates Jesus, he now hates you. And now he's got you in his crosshairs. And he's got you on his targets. He hates you because you've surrendered your life to Jesus. And what he's going to do is he's going to come at you with all types of adversity. He's going to come at you with all different forms of opposition. And so the question now is, what are you going to do when the adversity comes? What are you going to do when the opposition comes at you? And my hope for all of us this morning is that in the middle of opposition, in the middle of our adversity, that we would all show a form of resilience. That we would be resilient Christians. That we would be resilient followers of Jesus. The word resilience by definition just simply means the capacity to withstand. The ability to recover quickly from difficulties and hardship. One word answer we can say for this is resilience is a toughness. And so my hope for all of us today is that we would desire to be resilient Christians, resilient followers of Jesus. Because how many of you would agree it takes resilience to live this life? It takes resilience to follow Jesus. And the good news in all of this is the fact that we don't have to do it alone. We have someone that is far greater, far stronger, that is with us. And what we're going to see in our text today in Nehemiah chapter 4, we see where the people of Jerusalem, the Israelites, have returned to their homeland, Jerusalem, because they've been released out of their captivity. But as we've learned in the previous weeks, and if you haven't been here, if you've missed any of the previous weeks, go back and watch those. But we see that when they return back to their homeland, the situation is pretty severe. It's pretty bad. Their homeland isn't the way that they left it. It is actually in total devastation and ruins. In fact, the Bible tells us that the walls were broken down and the gates were burned. But God sends Nehemiah to go help lead them in the rebuilding of the walls, in the rebuilding of the city. And we've learned in the previous weeks that Nehemiah encourages them in the Lord. And because of that encouragement, the Bible says that their hands were strengthened, and the people of Israel were determined to rebuild the wall again, to do this work for the Lord. And so we saw last week in chapter 3 where they began the work. They began the process. And they're working hard for the Lord. They're working hard to rebuild the walls and to repair the gates. And everything seems to be going well. Everything appears to be doing all right until now. What we're going to see is that now that they're going to be facing these different types of opposition, this different type of adversity. And what I hope for you to understand this morning and to grip and to grasp of what I'm sharing with you is that I want you to see how they face this opposition. I want you to see how they face this adversity, while still being and continuing to be productive for the Lord, still working for the Lord. So Nehemiah chapter 4, we'll begin reading at verse 1. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 1 reads this way. When Sanballat heard that we were rebuilding the wall, he became furious. He mocked the Jews before his colleagues and the powerful men of Samaria and said, "What are these pathetic Jews doing? Can they restore it by themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they ever finish it? Can they bring these burnt stones back to life from the mounds of rubble?" Then Tobiah the Ammonite, who was beside him, said, "Indeed, even if a fox climbed up what they are building, he will break down their stone wall." Now that's pretty mean. That's pretty mean. That was unnecessary. But we see here adversity. We see here opposition. If you recall, we were first introduced to this gentleman by the name of Sanballat back in chapter 2. And if you remember, when Nehemiah was returning to Jerusalem, when he was going to Jerusalem to help rebuild the wall, he was the first opposition that came against Nehemiah. Now, Sanballat was believed to be the governor of Samaria, which was a surrounding region where they were rebuilding the wall. And so we see that Sanballat returns. He comes back to oppose what they are doing. I mean, clearly this guy just cannot move on. There's clearly something that he has that is unresolved. He's got these unresolved issues that he just cannot seem to get over. He's got some issues with the Israelites. And he's angry over the fact that the rebuilding of this wall is actually a challenge to his authority. It's a challenge to his authority. The very thought that this nation is being rebuilt is more than likely feeling like a threat to him, a threat to his rule, a threat to his leadership, a threat to his region. And so what does he do? We just read it in the text. He begins to oppose them. And what we see here is that Sanballat resorts to what is known as psychological warfare. The Bible tells us that he starts mocking them. He starts discouraging them. And not only that, he gets others to join in with them. I hope you understand this morning that this is the same exact tactic that the devil and all his demonic goons, they want to use against you. They want to use this against you. They want to mock you. They want to discourage you. The devil wants to hinder any type of godly progress that is being made in your life. And this morning, you've got to decide and you've got to choose what you're going to listen to. You've got to choose what it is that you are going to believe, which brings me to my first point this morning. If you're taking notes, write this down. You must choose to be resilient. You must choose to be resilient. It doesn't just happen automatically. You have to be intentional about your resilience. You must choose to be resilient. Why is that important? Because just like Sanballat, as we're going to read here in the text, our enemy, my enemy, your enemy, is not looking to quit or stop anytime soon. He's always going to be coming at us. He's always going to be opposing what is happening in our lives. And as we see here in the text, Sanballat, he gets vicious with his mockery. He calls them pathetic Jews. And he's basically telling them that they don't know what it is that they're doing. What are y'all doing over there? Y'all are crazy for doing that. There's no way you can use these burnt stones from this rubble to rebuild your wall. Well, that's similar to what the enemy says to all of us. That's similar to how the enemy mocks and opposes us. He mocks us in ways that challenge our faith. He mocks us in ways that challenge our following of Jesus. He says things like, man, you're not really saved. You're not really a Christian. You don't know what you're doing here in this life. You don't know how to pray. You don't know the Bible well enough. You're not as holy and godly as the other people in your church. Quit acting like a phony. They're going to find you out. They're going to discover you don't know what it is that you're doing. People are far more holier and godlier than you do. The people sitting next to you right now, if they only knew how much you don't know, you're a phony. And because of that, God can't love you. God doesn't love you. God is not pleased with you. He knows what you did last night. He knows what you did last year. He knows what you did 5 years ago. There's no way God loves you. And then to top it all off, there's no way God would ever use somebody like you to represent him. There's no way. But I'm here to tell you this morning that the same way we see the Israelites, the fact that they were able to pull up the burnt stone from the rubble to rebuild the wall, it's the same way God can pull you up into your broken life and rebuild and put everything back together again. The same way. That's what our God does. He can still use you. He can still use somebody like me. And that's the tactic of our enemy. That's the tactic of the devil, to mock you, to discourage you. And you've got to decide what voices you're going to choose to listen to. You've got to decide what you are going to choose to believe. You must choose to be resilient. You must choose to be resilient. But let's look at Nehemiah's response in verse 4. Verse 4, he says this. After the mockery, after the discouragement, this is Nehemiah's response. Listen, our God, for we are despised. Make their insults return on their own heads, and let them be taken as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their guilt or let their sin be erased from your sight, because they have angered the builders. So what we're seeing here is this reoccurring trait in the life of Nehemiah. We saw this in chapter 1. We saw the fact that he doesn't just react out of his emotion. Instead, the first thing he does is pray. The first thing he does is pray. And if you're going to choose to be resilient against the enemy, it can't be in your own strength. This is a spiritual battle, which brings me to my second point this morning is this. If you're going to be resilient, you must have resilience by prayer. You must have resilience by prayer. Nehemiah could have retaliated. Nehemiah could have spoke back vengefully towards Sanballat and the rest of the people, but he prayed. He called on God to defend his people. He called on God to defend the work that they were doing. But let me be very, very clear here, and I need you to really hear me and understand what I'm about to tell you this morning. That even though Nehemiah didn't retaliate, even though Nehemiah wasn't vengeful towards Sanballat, we can see here in verses 4 and 5, he was pretty frustrated. Nehemiah was frustrated. Nehemiah was hurt. You see this in his prayer. You see this in his prayer that he was hurt. And he was also honest. Nehemiah was honest in his prayer. Let's look at it for a moment. Look at what he tells God in his prayer. He tells God basically, let them experience everything that we've been through. Let them experience and know what it is to be in captivity. Let all the insults that they're throwing at us, man, let that return back on them. Now, that's a pretty honest prayer. That's a sign of somebody that's pretty frustrated. the insults, the captivity. Put all that back on them. Let them experience all the stuff that we are experiencing right now. But he doesn't end there, because even in verse 5, we really see his anger and frustration. What does he tell them? He says, don't cover their guilt. Don't erase their sin. You know what he's saying here in this moment? He's basically saying this: God, they can all go to hell as far as I'm concerned. Listen to what he's saying. God, don't forgive their sin. Don't erase their guilt. They can all go to hell. I don't care about them. I don't care about their eternity. I am so frustrated. I am so angry. I am mad right now. Put that all back on them. Now, before y'all start tripping and before y'all gasp on what I just said, let's not act like you've never felt that way about someone who's hurt you. Let's not act like you've never felt that way towards someone that has come against you. Let's not act like you've never felt that way towards someone who's betrayed you. Someone who's desired to cause harm to you. You may not have said it, but you sure thought it, though. In fact, some of you are in here right now like, no, I said it. I said it to their face. What's my point? Well, even though he didn't retaliate, even though he didn't speak vengefully back towards them, we still see his hurt and frustration. We also still see his honesty. And let it serve as an example to us is that we don't have to retaliate. We don't have to speak vengefully back to someone who has hurt us. Instead, we can take them to God in prayer. Instead, we can take them to God and let God handle it. We can bring our frustration. We can bring our hurt. We can bring our honesty before God. He's not put off by your frustration and honesty. He's not put off by your anger. God doesn't gasp when you get honest with him in prayer. In fact, he wants you to bring that to him. He wants you to bring your frustration. He wants you to bring your honesty towards him. We don't have to retaliate. We don't have to be vengeful towards other people. Jesus gives us an incredible example of what it looks like to respond to opposition and what it looks like to respond to adversity. I mean, we can look at the life of Jesus. I mean, from the very beginning of his ministry, Jesus was hated and he was opposed. Jesus wasn't even received in his hometown. They thought he was crazy. They thought he was foolish. Jesus was constantly being doubted. He was constantly being questioned by other religious leaders. They were always trying to entrap him. They were falsely accusing him. Jesus was betrayed by one of his closest friends, one of his own disciples. On the night that he was taken to be crucified, that he was arrested, he was abandoned by those closest to him. They left him out to dry. They left him to deal with it all by himself. They abandoned him. I mean, the list could go on and on and on of everything that Jesus has experienced, of everything that he has gone through. But get this, his character remained. His character remained. He continued doing what God had called him to do. And in doing so, let's look at what he did not do. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 21 says this: "For you were called to this, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps." Verse 22, "He did not commit sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When he was insulted, he did not insult in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but entrusted himself to the one who judges justly." He didn't retaliate. He didn't threaten. He entrusted himself to the Father, the perfect judge. I mean, Jesus even makes the statement, man, do you not realize that, yeah, I know what they're doing. I know what they want to do to me. I know that they want to hurt me. I know that they want to take me out. But do you not realize how many angels I could call down right now and crush everybody? I could do all that if I wanted to. But he chose not to. He chose not to retaliate. So in the same way, we must turn those that hurt us, those that mistreat us, those that have caused harm to us, we must turn all those people over to God. All of them over to God. Because as I said, he prefers you to bring your frustration to him. He prefers you to bring your hurt to him. Why? Because he'd rather you take out your frustration and hurt on him than on somebody else. He'd rather you bring all that to him than to take that out on somebody else. Because see, here's the thing about prayer. There's always a time to praise and worship in prayer. But there's also a time to vent in prayer. There's also a time to be honest in prayer. You can be honest with God about your frustration. You can be honest with God about your hurts. You can be honest with God about what you're really feeling. You're not going to scare him off. He wants you to bring it to him. Because oftentimes when people hurt you, when people mock you, when people want to oppose you, there are moments where we just need to shut up and let God handle it. We need to shut our mouths and let God handle it. And then we keep moving. Verse 6. So we rebuilt the wall until the entire wall was joined up together, half its height. For the people had the will to keep working. They had it in their hearts to persevere. They had the will to keep working. They didn't want to stop. And in the same way, we've got to resolve within our own hearts, we've got to resolve within our own lives that we are not going to quit. We're going to choose to be resilient in our walk with the Lord. We're going to choose to be resilient in following Jesus. Which brings me to my next point, number 3. We must have resilience by trust. Resilience by trust. Trusting God. God, I've turned them over to you. God, you've heard my frustration. God, you've heard my hurt. God, I've named all the people that have hurt me. I've named all the people that are bringing adversity to me. I've named all the people that are opposing me. God, I turn them over to you, and I trust you that you're going to deal with them justly. Resilience by trust. Resilience by trust. Why? Because as I said earlier, you have an enemy. We have an enemy that is not going to quit. He's going to keep on coming at you. He's going to keep on throwing adversity to you. He's going to keep on opposing you. Verse 7, this is what we see. It says, when Sanballat, Tobiah, and the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the repair to the walls of Jerusalem was progressing and that the gaps were being closed, they became furious. Verse 8, they all plotted together to come and fight against Jerusalem and throw it into confusion. They're not stopping. They're not quitting. Now we're seeing the opposition intensify. They went from just mocking and throwing insults. Now they're planning to attack. They moved from the psychological to now planning to the physical. And it says that they became furious. They grew in their anger. Notice what is driving them to this anger. What was it that was making them so upset? They were mad because the gaps in the walls were being closed. When you study the original language, when it talks about the gaps specifically to this text, they liken it to almost healing. A healing of the walls. The closing of the gap. What does that mean for us? It means that your enemy doesn't want to see you healed. Your enemy can't stand the fact that you're being healed. Your enemy can't stand the fact that your life is being restored. The enemy can't stand the fact that your marriage is being healed and restored. The enemy can't stand the fact that your family is being healed and restored. He's angry. He's furious. Which also means he's going to step it up a notch. I was just mocking them. I was just throwing insults at them, but I see that's not working. So now we've got to press in. Now we've got to come at them harder. Well, what do we do in that regard? Verse 9. So we prayed. So we prayed to our God and stationed a guard because of them day and night. Again, we see what is their response to pray. Their response is to turn it over to God. Leave it to him, the rightful, faithful, good judge. They respond in prayer again, but something different happens this time around. Not only do they respond in prayer, but this time we see them take action. It says that they stationed a guard. They kept watch. They prayed, they trusted God, but we're also keeping watch. We're not going to be foolish. We're going to use wisdom here, which is a good indication that you're praying in faith to God. It's a good indication that when you pray to the Lord and you're trusting him, a good indication that your prayer is faith-filled is what you do after you pray. Remember, your resilience by trust, your resilience by trusting God, but it doesn't mean that you just sit back and do nothing. Doesn't mean you just sit back and wait like, well, I trust that God's going to do something. Let me just post up right here and just wait and see whatever God is going to do. No, they prayed, they took it to God, but it says that they stood watch. We've got to be mindful of our enemy. We've got to be mindful of something. And so they prayed in faith and they acted in faith. That's equivalent to maybe what's going on in your life, right? Maybe you're praying to God for a job. You're praying to God for a job. Well, guess what? After you prayed to God for a job, what do you need to do? Start job hunting. Start job hunting. Maybe you're praying to the Lord, Lord, give me good health. What does that mean now? Start eating right. Start exercising. Start getting your body healthy. Well, is that a lack of faith? No. Actually, that's a sign of faith. That's a sign of faith. We want God just to miraculously zap us into good health. We want God to just miraculously give us a job. We want God to just miraculously restore all things. We want God to do all these different things. God is like, I can do all that, but I don't see you putting in any work. How bad do you really want this? I want you to trust me, but I don't want you to just trust me, sit back and do nothing. Show that you have faith in me. Show that you trust that I'm good at my word. Show that you trust that I'm good at coming through for you. Show that you are moving in faith. They took action. You praying for your marriage? Well, what steps are you taking to make it better? They prayed. They trusted. They prayed in faith. Verse 10, it says, in Judah, it was said, the strength of the laborer fails. Since there is so much rubble, we will never be able to rebuild the wall. Notice what's happening here, and I want you to pay attention to kind of what's happening in chapter 4. We see this kind of up and down happening with their faith. That's real life, y'all. That's humanity for you. That's what the Christian life looks like for the most part. I spoke in our previous series about the mountains and the valleys. Like that's life for us. We have high, peaking mountaintop experiences, and then we also have some experiences in the valley. We have seasons of life where everything is going great, and we have seasons of life where everything is not going so great. And we see their strength wavering. We see at times their faith wavering. We'll never be able to rebuild the wall. In verse 11, and our enemy said, they won't realize it until we're among them and can kill them and stop the work. And when the Jews who lived nearby arrived, they said to us time and again, everywhere you turn, they attack us. They're surrounding us. They are all around us. And all that means for us is that we've got to come to grips that fighting is a part of the Christian life. Fighting is a part of our walk with Jesus. We can't be just passive Christians. We cannot be passive Christians. We must learn to fight. We must learn to be resilient. Because the adversity and the attacks will always be coming. As long as we are on this earth, the attacks and adversity from the enemy are guaranteed. And so we must learn to fight. Verse 13, Nehemiah said, so I stationed people behind the lowest sections of the wall, at the vulnerable areas. I stationed them by families with their swords and spears and bows. And after I made an inspection, I stood up and said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, don't be afraid of them. Remember the great and awe-inspiring Lord and fight for your countrymen, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your homes. And so in wisdom, what do we see here? Nehemiah is acting in faith. He makes all the necessary safety precautions. That's wisdom. He isn't just going to sit back and do nothing. He stations everyone where they should be, and he gives them this short speech of encouragement. Notice what he doesn't say in this speech. He doesn't tell them, hey, if you can just muster up enough energy, if you could just persevere in your flesh, if you can just persevere in your own strength. No, he doesn't tell them that. What does he say? He tells them, I want you to look at who God is. Specifically, he says, remember the great and awe-inspiring Lord. Remember who God is. Remember what God is capable of. That's how he encourages them. That's how he intends to build them up. I need you to hear me on this because, see, one of the greatest weapons of our enemy, one of the greatest weapons of the devil is getting you to forget about God. It's to get you to forget about God. Because if he can get you to navigate through life without thinking about or even remembering who God really is, he's winning every single time. All I got to get them to do is not think about God. All I got to get them to do is not remember how awesome God really is. And we've got them. We win. We'll win every single time if they forget how awesome God really is. But it's when you look at who God is, it's when you remember how awesome and powerful the Lord is, that's what gets you ready to fight. It's you when you remember the Lord, that's what makes you resilient. That's what prepares you for adversity. That's what prepares you for the opposition, is remembering how awesome God is. It gets you ready to fight for your faith, to fight for what you believe about God, to fight for your families, to fight for your homes, to fight for your marriages, to fight for your children. You know, living in Texas is I love living in Texas. Texas is awesome to me. I love living here. But one of the things that's so interesting about Texas, especially when I speak to other Christians, one of the things that's interesting about Texas is that, you know, we fight a lot of these political things, especially when it comes to the right to bear arms. The Second Amendment, we fight for the right to have access to have these weapons, to protect our family's safety. And I get it, and I agree with that. Do whatever you can to protect your family. But I really wish that those same people who are professed followers of Jesus, those same people who are fighting for their Second Amendment rights, those same people that say, come and take it, Those same people, I really wish that they would put that much effort and energy, not only in fighting and protecting for their lives physically, but that they would put that much energy to fight and protect for their lives spiritually. Folks spend thousands of dollars on guns and ammunition and all these things to protect the family, to keep them safe. Meanwhile, their souls are being attacked. Their spirits are dying. Our enemy's like, yeah, go ahead and protect your home as much as you want to. Get a whole armory, buy a tank. Do it all to protect your family. Yeah, you'll keep them safe that way. Meanwhile, I'm already in the house. I'm already in the house. I've already got your kid's soul. I already got your kid's spirit. I've already got your kid's mind. What are you going to do to protect that? No amount of armory is going to protect that. No, we've got to fight. We've got to fight. We've got to be resilient. And we can only fight and be resilient when we know how awesome and powerful our God is. We've got to be ready to fight. We've got to be ready to fight and protect the spiritual lives of our households and our families. We've got to pray together. We've got to open the Bible together. We've got to talk about the Bible together. We've got to talk about the spiritual things. We've got to talk about God together. We've got to attend church together. We've got to come in fellowship together. These are the efforts that are being made to guard and protect the spiritual lives of our family, to fight for our family. We must be resilient. We must choose to fight. Verse 15, it says, when our enemies heard that we knew their scheme and that God had frustrated it, every one of us returned to his own work on the wall. And from that day on, half of my men did the work, while the other half held spears, shields, bows, and armor. The officers supported all the people of Judah who were rebuilding the wall. The laborers who carried the loads worked with one hand and held a weapon in the other. Verse 18, each of the builders had his own sword strapped around his waist while he was building, and the one who sounded the trumpet was beside me. So now the enemy now sees. The devil now knows that it's not going to be easy to stop this work. It's not going to be easy to stop what God is doing in your life. We've got to stop making it so easy for the devil. We've got to stop making it so easy for the enemy. Because what we see here, Nehemiah in wisdom, he assigns some to continue working on the wall, and then he assigns others to keep watch. But I want you to notice something here. Even those that were working on the wall had a tool in one hand and a weapon in the other. We're going to continue working. Hey, but if you want the smoke, you want to come fight me, I'm ready. I'm ready for you, but I'm going to continue working. And even though they continue to work, they were still mindful of the enemy. They were still mindful that there's a possibility of attack. That there's still possibility for opposition. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8 says this, be sober-minded, be alert. Your adversary, the devil, is prowling around like a roaring lion, looking for anyone he can devour. Be of sober mind. Be alert. But sadly, some of our minds are not sober. Sadly, many of our minds are so intoxicated with what the world has given us. We're so intoxicated with the lures of the world. We're so intoxicated with everything else society is bringing us and culture is bringing us. It's hard for us to be of sober mind. It's hard for us to be alert of the devil's schemes. It's hard for us to be alert of the ways that the devil wants to attack us. Because we're so inundated with so many things of the world. We're so inundated with social media. We're so inundated with what's going on in the news. We're so inundated with what's going on politically. We're so inundated with all these different things. And we're captivated by all those things that it's intoxicating our minds. And the word is saying here, no, don't do that. Be of sober mind. Be alert. Remember your God. Remember how awesome he is. But also remember you have an enemy that hates you and wants to kill you and wants to destroy you. Be alert. He's prowling like a roaring lion, seeking anyone he can devour. My friends, don't let him devour you. Don't let him devour your family. Quit being lazy. Quit being lazy when it comes to spiritual things. Quit being lazy when it comes to reading your Bible. Quit being lazy when it comes to prayer. Quit being lazy when it comes to attending church. Not legalism. I'm just trying to prepare you to fight. I'm just trying to prepare you for the attack of the enemy. I'm just trying to prepare you for the adversary that wants to take you out. I pray for you guys daily. We got to stop being lazy, people. We got to stop letting our guards down. We got to stop inundating ourselves with so many things that the world has to offer. And like, yeah, I'm so into this, I'm so into that. Yes, we're planning for this, and we're looking forward. My career's growing, and I'm glad it's growing. Oh, I'm getting money over here. Oh, man, we got to buy a house. We got all these different things that aren't bad things, but it's intoxicating. And a lot of those good things have got you taking your mind off the only good thing. Remembering the Lord your God, remembering how awesome he is, and remembering there is an enemy that wants to kill you and destroy you. Verse 19 said this, "Then I said to the nobles, the officials, and the rest of the people, the work is enormous and spread out, and we are separated far from one another along the wall." Verse 20, "Wherever you hear the sound of the trumpet, rally to us there. Our God will fight for us." Our God will fight for us. And so because of the size of this work, the rebuilding of the wall, it's a pretty large undertaking. It's a pretty large job to do. And so they needed to be spread out. They needed to be spread out to do the work, which obviously it posed some safety issues because it left some people alone over here. It left others alone over here. And so Nehemiah was aware of that. Nehemiah was aware this work's got to be done. And there are times where it's going to cause us to be separate. It's going to cause us to be spread out. And so Nehemiah's instruction is this: whenever you hear the trumpet sound, whenever you hear the trumpet sound, that means it's time for us to gather together and rally and come together and fight. Why? Because it's not good for you to be alone. It's not good for you to always be by yourself. We need each other. We've got to come together and rally. And let me tell you this morning, that's what's happening right now. Here in this very room, as we gather together as a church, this right here is a rally. This right here is the coming together. Because see, we're all sent out during the week, right? You're going to leave here today. You're going to be sent out to your home. You're going to be sent out to your workplace. You're going to be sent out to wherever you go this week. Prayerfully to do the work of the Lord, to do a work as a representative of Jesus. You're going to be sent out. You may be by yourself. You may be alone. Whatever you're going to do to work and live for Jesus, you're going to be out there on your own to tell others about him, to represent him, to do all those things. But like Nehemiah says, like the word says, at the appointed time, the trumpet will blast. And it's time to come together. It's time to rally together. Let's rally together. Let's worship. Let's learn. Let's grow. Let's be here for one another. This right here is like the trumpet call for all the Christians to gather. This is where we come together to get refreshed. This is where we come together to get renewed. This is where we come together to get encouraged. And sadly, there are a lot of people who are professed followers of Jesus that just prefer to stay out there. I don't need this right here. I don't need this. This is another thing to do on a Sunday. If you really knew what was up, I'm so busy during the week, I'd rather just sleep in. Instead, you saying this is important? I am. And sadly, there are people that are out there that don't realize that I need them as much as they need me. They don't realize that they need you as much as you need them. We need each other. We need to encourage one another. We need to build up one another. We need to rally together. Why? Because out there alone, we can get weak. Out there alone, we're more susceptible for attacks of the devil. We're more susceptible from opposition of the devil. And there are times where my spirit gets weak. But when I gather with you all, you encourage me. You build me up. You get me prepared and ready to go out this following week. This right here is preparing me for when I leave here today. It's preparing me for tomorrow. It's preparing me for Tuesday. It's preparing me for Wednesday. It's preparing me for the rest of the week. And guess what? Sunday, boom, the trumpet's going to blow. And it's time to rally. And it's time to gather again. What happens when we rally? Well, it's a declaration and a reminder to all of us how awesome God is, but not only that, that our God will fight for us. I'm not fighting this battle on my own. I'm not fighting this battle on my own terms, in my own strength. But we have a God that is fighting for us. And guess what? Though he's already fought for us, the benefit of all that, the blessing of all that, is that he's already won. He's already won. We are rallying, not in the hopes that we win. We are rallying from a place of victory. When we gather together on Sunday mornings, when we rally together, we're not rallying saying, man, I hope we do well this week. I hope we win one day. I hope we'll win next year. No, when we rally as people that are already won. People that are already victorious. We rally from a place of victory, which means if we're going to have resilience to face opposition, if we're going to have resilience to face adversity, it means that we have resilience from victory. We have resilience from victory. Colossians chapter 2, verse 14 says this. He erased the certificate of debt with its obligations that was against us and opposed to us, and has taken it away by nailing it to the cross. He disarmed the rulers and authorities and disgraced them publicly. He triumphed over them in him. Guess what? The cross of Christ was the weapon that has disarmed the enemy. It's disarmed the enemy. I say this often, the greatest problem you would ever have in life is that you are not right with the Father, that you are not right with God. And yet Jesus has come along and solved and come through and been the solution for the greatest problem you would ever have in life. He's made you right with God. He's made you right with the Father. Because of his death on the cross and him raising from the grave, we have victory. We've already won. We don't have to live in defeat. We don't have to live in a constant state of loss. We don't have to believe the lies and the mockery of the enemy. We don't have to believe any of those things. Why? Because we've already won. The devil is just a sore loser. He's just a sore loser. He's angry and upset at the fact that he was disgraced publicly. Every time I read that passage of Scripture that talks about he disarmed the rulers and authorities and disgraced them publicly, I always think about folks who do the touchdown dance in the end zone. It's not enough they just scored on their team, but now they dance. Now they dance, they get excited, they jump, they do the dance, they spin the ball, they do all the necessary things they get penalized for. But what it is a notion of saying, hey, in your face. It's not enough that I scored against you. But now I'm going to celebrate in front of you. And when we rally and we come together on a Sunday morning, when we gather together, we are celebrating in the face of the devil. We're celebrating in the face of the enemy because we've already won. And the devil, being the sore loser that he is, he's going to try to mock you. He's going to try to discourage you. Because he knows his time is already finished. He knows he has already lost. Dennis, you can come on up. Verse 21 in closing. So we continued the work. While half of the men were holding spears from daybreak until the stars came out. At that time, I also said to the people, let everyone and his servant spend the night inside Jerusalem so they can stand guard by night and work by day. And I, my brothers, my servants, and the men of the guard with me never took off our clothes. Each carried his weapon, even when washing. They continued to work. Yeah, we hear the insults of the enemy. Yeah, we hear the mockery. Yeah, I hear what they're saying. They're calling us foolish Jews and pathetic Jews. And I hear what they're saying. They're saying they don't know what we're doing. I hear all that, but we keep working. We keep moving. We keep progressing. We choose to be resilient. We choose to be resilient. Not in our own strength. Not in our own might. But we choose resilience because of prayer. We pray. We speak to God. We give God all of our frustration. We give God all of our hurt. We give God all of our honesty. We turn our enemies over to the Lord. I don't need to fight them. I don't need to retaliate against them. I don't need to speak a vengeful word against them. I turn them over to God and let God deal with them. It's resilience by prayer. And that when I pray, now I know there's a trust. Now I can trust God. I left it in his hands. Now I trust him. So in that, there's resilience by trusting him. And that really, most importantly, that I can still be resilient from victory. That we've already won. We've already won. No, this Christian life, following Jesus, is not easy. Yes, this life comes with its problems. Yeah, I'm walking through some adversity right now. You can probably all agree with me, say, yeah, you know what? I'm walking through some adversity right now. There's mockery that is happening and coming against me. They're trying to discourage me. The enemy's trying to discourage me. That's just a sign that the enemy hates to see the progression of God in your life. You're angering and frustrating the devil. Why? Because there's healing happening on the inside of you. There's restoration happening on the inside of you. The devil would not come against you if you weren't a threat to him. He wouldn't mock you and try to discourage you if you weren't a threat to him. But the very means that you're facing adversity right now, the very means that you're facing opposition right now, as bad as it may be, as much as you may want to get out of that, just rest assured that what's happening in your life right now is angering your enemy. And he's a sore loser. And he doesn't want to see victory in your life. You got to choose to be resilient. You've got to choose to fight. Let's stand to our feet.